Well, hey there. You want to talk about classic literature? That's a terrible pickup line. Don't try that with your friends. Hello, welcome back to the channel. My name is Ashley. Today I'm going to be discussing all the books I want to read in the year 2022. So the last 2 years I've participated in the Classicsathon readathon. Questioning whether that's the actual name. Yes, that's the actual name. I'm not sure if Lucy the Reader is actually still hosting this, but I'm going to do it personally for myself. Essentially, the goal is to read more classics and to discuss these classics with people on the interweb, since it's hard to find people in real life to discuss classics with sometimes. My personal goal is probably to read about 10 to 12 pieces of classic literature this year. I tend to read longer works of classic literature, so we're going to drop the number down a little bit. In the past, it's been at least a classic a month. I never actually read the classic a month. I just don't read for a while, and then I read a lot, and then I don't read for a while, and then I read a lot. You get the idea. You can do the math. I've split this up into a couple different categories. The first category is Shakespeare, the Bard. I am curious. I think I've read all 3 of these plays before, but I was middle school, and I was just reading them to say that I had read them. So I want to deeply study them and consider them, and I'm picking King Lear, The Tempest, and All's Well That Ends Well. Out of these 3 plays, I am the most familiar with The Tempest. The Tempest was my favorite play up until I read Twelfth Night. But I think I'm going to have a lot more issues now that I'm older and can look at the romance with a little more critical eye in The Tempest. So I would love to touch one of these, possibly all of these plays, sometime this year. Now, when I read Shakespeare, I don't get it the first time or the second time. So I'm planning on reading these at least 3 times before I consider myself finished with them. I think Shakespeare is probably something that you need to marinate in and think a lot about and read very slowly. So that's kind of how I'm attempting or planning about going about these. So when I pick up this play, I'm going to read it several times, and each one of those times that I read it, I'm going to mark it as a piece of classics. So if I read all 3 of these plays 3 times, woohoo, 9 classics! Easy peasy way to get to 10 to 12 classics in a year. That would be the easy way out, or not the easy way out because it's Shakespeare. Next on this list is for the Dickens versus Tolstoy readathon, hosted by Emma from Emmy and Carolyn from Carolyn Marie Reads. I don't have time to read and be part of this every single time they host one, so I'm just going to focus on Charles Dickens this year. I love Tolstoy. I know I love Tolstoy. I need to be convinced of Charles Dickens. At some point I will go back and read the Leo Tolstoy versions. The only exception to that might be The Death of Ivan Ilyich. I think that's how you pronounce that one. Whenever they do that one, I might hop in and do that depending on what my workload is and what my school load is. So the books that I'm definitely going to get to by Charles Dickens this year are Barnaby Rudge, The Old Curiosity Shop, Martin Chuzzlewit, which I think bankrupted him because nobody liked it, so I'm really curious about that one, Dombey and Sons, and then The Battle of Life and Haunted Man, which I think are 2 Christmas tales that no one ever talks about. I didn't even realize that Charles Dickens had written several Christmas tales until this readathon. I really want to be able to say that I've read everything that Charles Dickens has written, and his later things are so much better than his earlier things. So I'm really interested to see at what point I switch over and decide that I do like Charles Dickens writing, because so far up to this point, I'm not feeling it. Okay, so the next category in this list is what I've called the romantic list ish. So we have the Jane Austen, and we have the Bronte sisters. So Mansfield Park is the last Jane Austen book that I haven't read yet. Technically I've read all of them except Mansfield Park, but I was half paying attention to Emma and to Northanger Abbey, so I'm going to try those 2 again. But for sure, I want to finish Mansfield's Park, and I would like to try Emma again. I also want to read Jane Eyre again. I loved it in college, and I want to read that world again. And then Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. I've heard so many things about Wuthering Heights and the romance there, and Heathcliff being a weirdo, and I just want to know. I want to understand the pop culture references for this one, so I would really, and because it's a romance, it might be easier to take down because I'm in a romance reading kind of mood. We'll see. Right now I currently have Jane Eyre pulled out because that's where I want to go first. That's probably where I'm going to start with, in addition to a Shakespeare text. We'll just see how this plays out. Next, every year I challenge myself to read a tome, which is a book over 500 pages. I've been doing this every year since 2018, and I quite enjoy that challenge. So, and it's an intentional book, because I know a lot of Charles Dickens books are over 500 pages, but I'm going to pick one in addition to the books by Charles Dickens. So the two that I have in mind are Moby Dick or Don Quixote. Don Quixote? Don Quixote? How do you pronounce that? Don Quixote. I listened to Moby Dick, and I think I listened to an abridged version, and I really loved it actually. I really enjoyed the narrator, I enjoyed the story, but I don't think I listened to the full version because I think it was only like 15 hours, and that book is much longer than a 15-hour audiobook. I also really want to be able to read Don Quixote because it's considered one of the first modern novels written in that sense. I also hear so much referenced to Pancha? That's Emperor's New Groove. I hear references to a crazy knight fighting windmills in this story, and I want to know. And speaking of that, the final category I have on this list are the books called Classics I Should Have Read by Now. So these are the works of classics that I have known have been classics. I've heard way too much about them. They've kind of been hovering there in the back of my head for a really long time, and I still have not touched them. So I would like to prioritize at least one of them this year. So out of these three, I want to pick one. So we have Walden's Pond by Henry David Thoreau. We have 1984 by George Orwell. And we have Pictures of Dorian Gray. Dang it. By... where is it? Oscar Wilde. Oh, I didn't know Oscar Wilde wrote that. Fun fact, Oscar Wilde wrote Pictures of Dorian Gray. You know what? I think I did this exact same thing last year where I went, I didn't know Oscar Wilde wrote this. Now that makes me want to read it more. Obviously, because I didn't read it. So I'm going to pick one of these to make my way through. Now, a few ground rules in terms of reading classic literature this year. I want to enjoy reading classic literature. So if that means that I only read 1 or 2 pieces of classic literature this year, that's fine. That is more classic literature than I would be reading if I wasn't doing this challenge. I also want to annotate and write my thoughts very heavily in the margins or on sticky notes, and I want to interact and annotate. I want to annotate and interact with the text. There we go, that's the way I want to say that. And then I want to watch movie adaptations. I always say that, and then I check the movie out, and then I'm just like, maybe I don't actually want to watch this. So I've read Anna Karenina and War and Peace, and I still haven't watched the movie adaptation, and that makes me a little sad. I also just need to prioritize watching movies just in general. With all my spare time that I have going on this year. I don't know, we might shut down again, so I might have some time for that. I know I've talked about in the past, the fact that I have a giant TBR doesn't make me feel any pressure to read that. The only exception to that is the classics. I have a ton of classics, and I want to be able to say that I've read all of them. Which means I need to stop buying more. But I feel like they would help my brain grow. That's the belief. That is what society has taught me about classics. So let's see if that happens, see if it works. With all that being said, this is my long list of classics that I'm going to attempt to read this year. I have really grand ambitions. Really grand. We'll see at the end of the year how many of these I actually can mark off. I made this list last year and marked off 2 out of the 10, 12 that I marked. I don't even remember. It was a failing grade. That's what I remember. That's all I got. I will see you in another video and talk with you in the comments down below. Bye!